We're going to begin looking at some strategies and models, the representations that students can use in kindergarten as they're beginning to explore with addition and subtraction. Now, in kindergarten, the addition and subtraction that students are doing are limited within 10. And so this is very intentional so that a lot of the thinking and reasoning can really focus on some strategies that we're building in other areas of the standards and mathematics. In kindergarten, one of the first things that students begin to do with numbers really focuses on that counting and cardinality. Learning the counting sequences, learning the numbers, the beginnings of foundation of place value, decomposing some teen numbers into their tens and their ones. And as students get a little bit more familiar with our number system, as the system works and begin to have some fluency with counting forwards and counting backwards, we start to introduce the ideas of addition and subtraction. And the first way that that should be introduced with students in order to continue with the work that they've already been doing, that they've already been thinking about, is just by counting on in order to add and counting back in order to subtract. So you'll see I have some number lines here going with some of these expressions. I would actually recommend not starting with number lines. When students first start thinking about addition and subtraction and that idea of counting on and counting back, they should first start just with manipulatives, having some physical counters, things that they can touch, whether they're the mathematical manipulatives, the tools, the counters, or if it's just candy or paper clips or any sort of toy, anything that they can physically touch and move and sort of have a cluster of 6 things I can touch and 3 things that I can touch, and counting the 6 and then counting on the 3 more to see the sum of that. And subtraction, taking 7 actual objects that we can touch and physically removing 3 of those and then recounting. But as students start to understand some of the reasoning that's going on with the counting up and the counting back, we do want to eventually move them from some of the physical concrete things that they can touch. We don't want to completely remove them from that, but we want to start building a bridge into things that are more representational. So some pictorial versions of that. Instead of counting physical things, drawing pictures, drawing circles and then drawing more circles and then counting that. And then eventually working into things that are slightly more abstract and representational. And in those kindergarten benchmarks around counting and comparing numbers, we see the number line introduced in the clarifications and the examples of those benchmarks. And then in the benchmarks that deal with addition and subtraction in kindergarten within 10, we also see mention of number lines introduced through the clarifications and the examples, and that seeing that addition is counting on or jumps up on a number line, and that subtraction is counting back or jumps back on a number line. In kindergarten, dealing with those number lines, I would recommend starting with number lines that are already provided, not necessarily asking students to create those number lines on their own. Certainly as they get more comfortable or later in the year, they might be able to start drawing them. Another thing that I would recommend, hopefully you notice the 5 number lines that I have here aren't exactly the same. This first one starts at 0 and it goes to 10. That's that range of numbers we're working with in addition and subtraction. But the second one, I started at 3 and I went to 11, even though with addition and subtraction in kindergarten, according to the benchmarks, we don't go up to 11. 11 is a number they're familiar with, so it's okay to see that on the number line. This third one here, it goes from 2 to 9, and then these last 2 I have, they're different as well. We might accidentally imply to students that number lines have to be a given way, have to start at 0 or have to start at 1 or end at a certain number if we only ever show them in one way. And so to intentionally differentiate what those number lines looks like, just make sure that as students progress in first grade, second grade, and so on, that their thinking around the number line and the way that they'll be able to use the number line stays flexible. So 6 plus 3 on our number line, to think of this counting on strategy, all we will do is decide which number we want to start with. At first, students are most likely going to always gravitate towards picking that first add-in. So let's just find that first add-in. Let's find 6 on our number line. So here we are. We can teach students to circle that number or to put a dot, just some way to locate. This is our starting position. We already have 6, and now we're going to count on 3 more. And we want to show that counting on as some jumps on the number line to physically see. All right, well, there's 1. All right, well, here's 2, and here's 3. We made those 3 jumps on the number line, and after we make those 3 jumps, we end up here at 9. So 6 and 3 more. We start at 6. We have our 3 jumps. 6 plus 3 is 9. We can see that same thing with 5 plus 2. Again, the number line is built slightly different. Want to make sure that students know number lines are flexible tools. They don't always have to start at 0 and go to 10. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and start at 5. I'm going to start at that first add-in, 5. I'm going to add 2 more. So I'm going to start at 5 and make my 2 jumps. When I make 2 jumps, I end up at 7. So I see that 5 plus 2 is 7. All right, for this third one, I'm actually going to do this 2 different ways. I'm going to start with how students might typically begin, because students tend to gravitate to just always starting at that first add-in. It makes sense. It's the first one I see, so it's the first one I'm going to use. I'm going to start at 3, and so if I begin at 3, I'm going to make 5 jumps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And after I make my 5th jump, I see that I've ended up at 8. So 3 plus 5 is 8. Now, an expression like this is a good opportunity for students to start to explore and discover the idea of the commutative property. Because in this example, had I started with 5 instead, if I would have started at 5 and made 3 jumps, 1, 2, 3, I still land at 8. I still see that 3 plus 5 is 8, just like 5 plus 3 is 8. However, one of these strategies was slightly more efficient than the other. Counting on 3 more from 5 was more efficient than counting on 5 more from 3. And so maybe giving students problems like 3 plus 5 and then having 5 plus 3 in succession right after that, they could see that, oh, they have the same add-ins, they had the same sum, so does that mean that always works? And then we could give them 6 plus 3 and 3 plus 6, 8 plus 2 and 2 plus 8, so they can kind of play around and see that pattern, see that commutative property of addition. Even though in kindergarten they don't have to name or know that idea, know that property by name, it is certainly advantageous for them to begin exploring the idea of the commutative property, to begin building efficiency and making some decisions in a problem like this, knowing that I can start at 5 and count up 3 instead of the other way around. Slightly more efficient. Now, the inverse, the sort of doing that strategy backwards instead of counting on, we can also use the number line for subtraction to count back. So here we'll begin at 7. So I'm going to start at 7. I'm going to count back 3. 1, 2, 3. When I count back 3, I see that I have landed at 4, which means that 7 minus 3 is 4. 9 minus 4, again, I'm going to start at 9. I'm going to count back or jump back 4 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4. I see that here I'm at 5, so 9 minus 4 is 5. So that is using the number line to show that counting on, counting back as jumps forward, jumps back in order to add and subtract. One final note, a misconception that sometimes comes up, especially in kindergarten as students start using the number line. It is important to reinforce that when we're making these jumps, that when we're counting on, we're counting back, that we're landing on the hash mark. That's what we're counting. We're jumping from this hash mark at 6 to this hash mark at 7. Sometimes students want to count the spaces in between, which can lead to some misconceptions and eventually lead to some errors. So it's something that I would maybe not recommend you address to all students, but it's something to look out for as students are working. You're collecting some information, some data through formative assessment. There might be students that are making that error, and so that is something to look out for as students start using the number line in kindergarten.